One of the difficult things about Old Testament scripture, of course, is that it's much older than the New Testament, that it takes us back 1,000, 2,000 years before Christ. And so we may well have questions about, well, this person like Abraham, supposed to have lived maybe 1800 years before Christ. Well, how do we know that he really lived? And how can we trust the stories about Abraham? Actually, what we can say about the Gospels and what we can say about the way the stories of Jesus actually developed, we could say is quite similar with a lot of Old Testament figures as well. Because we have the written stories of Abraham in the book of Genesis, but we don't believe that the book of Genesis was properly completed till the late period of the first millennium, so we're talking about maybe 400 BC. But there's plenty of evidence that all of the material, or much of the material which gets into the book of Genesis, actually was passed down in what we call oral tradition, the traditions about the ancestors. Abraham as the father of the Jews. So was he real? To what extent do we know about him, and to what extent is this a reflection on how God chose this people from way back, and the stories develop with that kind of faith? Now, I think what I'm saying here is that we can't expect to have a blow-by-blow account of the life of Abraham. But I would have thought that the traditions which are developed and which we have in the book of Genesis actually are based on a real person. Abraham, his original name, which was Abram, which is the exalted father, and then he is given the name father of a multitude, and then he has children, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the sons of Jacob. This strikes me, and strikes scholars in general, I would say, as something from a very ancient tradition. And those stories that we have would have been things that were recalled about Abraham, but what we've got to be ready for is that they may well be developed, particularly as the faith of the ancient people developed. So new things might be said about Abraham, developed in different ways. We refer to him, Catholics particularly, as our father in faith. And I think people might imagine that means he knew the creed, that he knew our faith. And that, of course, would not be right, because our faith develops. It develops over centuries. It develops above all with Jesus Christ. But by the same token, I think we can also say that something of what Abraham believed and why he is remembered is really genuine and goes back to those ancient times. Now, one of the things which we can do with Abraham is to look at other civilizations, the way they lived, the values that they had, and very often there would be similarities there. But this kind of unique faith which Abraham witnesses to, that he worships a God who cares for him, who travels with him, who makes promises to him, which are then fulfilled. I think these are pretty ancient insights, and from them you get the whole story of the Jewish people developing.